My type of preaching is a type that I like to try to encourage you. I hope that you leave here this morning encouraged and lifted up. The scripture reading that I chose this morning is there on the screen. You can read it with me. It said, "Therefore encourage one another, build each other up just as fast as you are doing." I think we do a great job here at the Church of the Nazarene in Cherry Grove encouraging one another. And I want us to continue to do that. But the gist of my sermon is just that, to encourage one another. But I want us to take this encouragement, and I want us to take what we do here out into the world. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that this morning. I guess I hadn't been fire chief more than a couple of years when a gentleman came to us from the eastern part of the state, and he'd been on a fire department there on the east side of the state for about 6 or 7 years. And we had a fire one night, and we spent most of the night out there, as we usually do. Everyone's tired and pretty well beat up by the time we got back to the station. And as we begin to clean up equipment and make sure that everything was ready to go for the next fire, whenever it might be, John was one of the last of the people to leave the fire hall that day, that early morning. And as John was leaving, I looked at him and I said, "John, thanks a lot for helping us out last night." I said, "You did a great job." I said, "Appreciate your help." And he stopped and he set his fire gear down and he looked at me and he said, "Chief, what did you say?" I said, "John," I said, "thanks." And he said, "You know, I've been in the fire service for 6 or 7 years. And he said, that's the first time someone's ever thanked me for helping." And I thought about that a lot since that time. And I thought, how many times do we walk by people? And how many times do we see people that do work for us and do things for us, and we really don't thank them and encourage them and tell them what a great job that they've done? One of our great pastors in the Church of the Nazarene was Jack Holcomb. Jack was our pastor here at one time. Jack went on to do great things for the church, and he got cancer and died way too early. But he retired, and during his retirement time, he wanted to find another job to do to supplement his income. And Jack told this story. He said he got a job driving cars where a dealership would go and buy cars in the southern part of the state, and then he was part of the crew that went down and picked these cars up and drove them back to the dealership. So he said on those days when he would get in that car to drive down to pick up cars, he was with usually 5 or 6 other gentlemen. And he said he couldn't believe the language that these gentlemen used. And then he began to look at their lives, and he said some of them would get in that car and they'd be hung over because they'd been drinking the night before. And he said it was just a really rough bunch of people. And he said several times he made those trips, and finally one day one of them said, and what did you do for a living before you started doing this? And he said, "I was a pastor of the Church of the Nazarene." And he said, "You could have heard a pin drop in there." But he told this story. He said after he retired and after he had that experience driving and being with these people, he said that he began to understand what his parishioners had gone through as they came to his services every Sunday. And he said he'd been a pastor his whole life, and he said, "I'm not sure I fully understood that." And so after he retired, he also supplemented his income by filling in at churches. And so he had this sermon that he preached. And he said he would have done things a lot differently as a pastor if he'd have known what we do and what we have happens in our life during the week. And how so many times we come into this service and we're kind of beat down and downtrodden just over the work environment itself. I was just talking to Becky a few minutes ago. She came up and I asked her how her week went. She said she's been busy and she's been working 12-hour days. 12 hours. And I'm thinking, you know, and Becky says, and not only am I working 12-hour days, she said, as soon as service is over, I got to go back to work today. You know. And that kind of beats you down, and you come to church kind of beat up a little bit, and you come to church tired, and do we really lift these people up? Do we really thank them for what they do? Mother Teresa said this. She said, being unwanted, unloved, uncared for, forgotten by everybody, I think is a much greater hunger and a much greater poverty than the person who has nothing to eat. Let me read that to you again, because I think this is really important. It said, being unwanted, unloved, uncared for, forgotten by everybody, I think is a much greater hunger, a much greater poverty than a person who has nothing to eat. I'm pretty much convinced that Satan works very hard to make people feel devalued and worthless. Do you? I think so. I think if he can make us feel devalued, if he can make us feel that we're not worthy or worth much, that's where he gets his toehold. That's where he really works on us a lot. And I asked Paul in the sound booth, I said, can you find that picture of Jesus smiling? Did you see that? You don't see that very often in the pictures that are drawn in our caricature of who we think Jesus is. But I remember, and I don't know if it was Paul or somebody else, it might have been, others, but that picture, when I saw that picture, the first time I saw that, I said, that's the Jesus I want. That's the Jesus that I see when I pray. That's a Jesus that knows how to pick you up and lift you up and have fun with you and enjoy life. And I just love that picture. So I told Paul, I said, would you put that picture up there and just leave it up there while I'm preaching, because I just think that's the neatest picture of Jesus that there ever was. Not long ago, I was at a workshop that Love Inc. puts on, and it's to teach people different kinds of life skills and things that would help them lift themselves up and become better people. And one of the classes that I went to that they were showing 6 young ladies on how to use a sewing machine and how to sew. And this is what happened while I was there. The 6 young ladies were starting to sew, and one lady started to sew, and those people who sew, and I've watched Anne Marie do this too, every once in a while that needle won't do what it's supposed to do. And she had a big ball of thread at the bottom of that needle, and it just quit sewing. And so she just had a mess there in front of her. And she looked at the instructor and she said these words that just haunted me. She said, I told you that I was an airhead. I can never get anything right. And I felt so bad for her. And I thought, boy, no one's really telling her that she's worth something. Somebody's telling her the wrong stuff. And the instructor was so kind to her, and the instructor was so good with her, she walked over and she said, oh, I've seen this before. She said, this happens to me all the time. And she said, actually, this is kind of a blessing. She said, because here's what we'll do. We'll figure out what went wrong here, and then next time you'll know. And next time, and she called the other students over and said, watch, and I'll show you how we fix this and how we get the tension right. And I don't know anything about sewing, but she knew how to fix it. And so she dealt with her in that manner, but what she said haunted me and still does today. I told you I was an airhead. I can't learn anything. And I wonder how many times we walk by people. How many times there's people in our lives that are going through that experience and things are really difficult for them, and we don't say anything to them. We don't do anything to encourage them, to build them up. I think one of the most valuable gifts in the world is to pay someone a sincere compliment. It gives tremendous strength. And I want you to try something this week. Like I say, my sermon material this morning is not so much for us here, although we need to do that here to build each other up, because I see you doing that. And I think our old handshaking, back-slapping time is a time when we do that. It's so good to see you. I'm glad you're here. And we build each other up. But I want you to take it out of this environment and use it out where you live and places where you go. And Anne Marie and I have been having a lot of fun in the last few years as we go to. And now, where does Pastor shop? Yeah, we shop at Walmart. But we have a lot of fun going into Walmart, and when we reach, and it's especially true this time of the year because we're coming up on the Thanksgiving season and the Christmas season. And I tell you, those people who work the cash register, they get beat up on. And people just, they're there for a job, and people just get in line and they just walk through the line. And you try this one time. When you get in that line with the cash register, look at the people in front of you and look and see if any of them are smiling. Not a one of them. I can almost guarantee it. They're there to get their stuff, and I'm standing in line, and this shouldn't take so long, and I should be able to get my stuff and get out of here. And that's all that cashier sees the whole time that they're working. And so when Emery and I walk in, we try to give them a smile right off the get-go. A smile makes the biggest difference in the world, And then they wear that name tag. And you can call them by name. And I've actually seen cashiers, when you call them by name, their heads just bob up. And they look at you, and they see you smiling, and they smile back. And they just can't wait to take care of you. And I think that's the kind of message that we should take out into the world. One of the most valuable gifts we can have is to pay someone a sincere compliment. It gives tremendous strength. But the first thing we have to do is acknowledge their presence. We have to acknowledge that they're there. We have to acknowledge that they're right here in front of us, and it's someone that we need to pay attention to. We need to show people appreciation, give credit when credit is due. And I believe that God is not pleased when we don't do it. I think God is pleased when we pay people compliments and when we give them encouragement and when we try to help them the best way that we know how. Sometimes it's not a real big thing. It's not a great big deal. It doesn't have to be anything more than just a smile. I believe there's people in this world, and I believe there's people that come into this congregation from time to time that are just starving for encouragement. They're just starving for someone to say, "Hi, how are you? I love you." And I'm one of those guys. I grew up in an environment, in a home, where we didn't say, "I love you" a lot. It wasn't that we didn't love each other. We just kind of thought, well, we just show it, I knew my dad always loved me. I knew my mom always loved me. And we just kind of felt like we didn't have to say it. But as I got older, I realized how important and how valuable those words are. And so you in this congregation know a lot of times I give you a hug, I shake your hand, I say I love you. Because I think we need to hear that. I think it's important. We can't take people for granted and just say, you're here, that's good. We have to tell them that we appreciate them, that we care for them, and that we love them. And it doesn't have to be big stuff. God does it through people, and those people are us. We're the ones that God uses to get through to people that we love them and encourage them and we want to help them. We encounter people every day who are just trying to survive one more day emotionally. I really believe that. I think the lady with the sewing machine was just trying to survive one more day emotionally. And I think that a lot of times there's people walking amongst us in our midst, and not only here, again, out in the world where we see people every day. I think there's people out there that we meet constantly that are just trying to make it through one more day. How would Jesus look at these people? Jesus said, "What we do for the least of these, you do for me." So when you encourage someone, when you tell someone that you love them, when you tell someone that you appreciate what they do, you're doing it for Jesus. You're doing it for Jesus. If someone feels devalued, slighted, or ignored, their self-worth goes downhill really fast. And if someone came to you and started to devalue one of your children, how would you feel? We wouldn't like that very well. And you know what? Jesus' children are being devalued daily. And we need to help in that arena. Let's be people, the kind of people who build people up, not tear them down. I remember a fire chiefs conference I went to one time, and I may have used this illustration before, but it bears repeating if you have heard it. But one of the most progressive chiefs that I ever sat under was a chief by the name of Chief Brunacini out of Phoenix, Arizona. He flew all the way from Arizona to Michigan to talk to us about how we treat our firefighters. And I'll never forget, Chief Brunacini is a little short guy. He only stands about 5'6", maybe 7 at the most. And he's kind of dumpy looking. And, you're expecting this big highfalutin chief. And I mean, he wrote books, and we studied under his books and all those kinds of things. And you're expecting this great, big, huge personality to show up. But here comes Chief Brunacini out. And he walks with his hands behind his back like this. And he kind of shuffles along, and he's got his cowboy boots on because he lives in Arizona, And he's kind of got his head down. And he's got a Hawaiian shirt on, untucked. And he walks out onto the stage, and you could hear a pin drop. Everyone's quiet. Everybody's waiting to hear what Chief Brunacini has to say. And he's got his head down, and he kind of looks at you over the top of his glasses like that. And he looked over the crowd this way, and he looked over to the crowd this way. And it was so quiet in there, you could hear him breathing. And this is what he said. He said, "Fire chiefs, if your firefighters mess up, yell at them. They just love it." We got the message. People don't like to be yelled at, do they? And he spent the next 2 days telling us how to treat our firefighters fairly. And he told some great stories about things that happened in Phoenix and how he dealt with them. And how, he told one great story about the firefighter that messed up, and I won't go into great detail, but he messed up so bad the firefighters thought he was going to be fired. And so Monday morning he's at the chief's office, and he walked into the office, and Chief Brunacini's sitting behind the desk, and he said, "Come on in." And a guy came in, and he stood there at his desk. Chief Brunacini's looking at him again over the top of his glasses. And you got to understand, this firefighter wrecked a $450,000 fire truck. Chief Brunacini looked at him over the top of his glasses, and he said, "Did we learn anything yesterday?" The firefighter said, "I sure did." He said, "Then go back to work." How would you feel? Would you be a firefighter that would do anything for Chief Brunacini after that? Would you go home and tell your wife, "You can't believe what Chief Brunacini did for me today. I really am somebody. I'm going to be okay." All right? Let's make people we encounter every day feel better and add value to their lives. And a good place to start is right here. And we're already doing it. We need to add value to everyone's life that comes within this church walls. We need to start here, but then we need to go out into the world and let them know how much we love them as well. Well, what do we do? How do we start all this? Well, I already touched on it a little bit, but I want to expand on it a little. The first thing you can do is to smile, okay? Start with a smile. You're all just looking at me. You're all just staring at me. What happens when you see someone and you walk up to them and you've got a big smile on your face? Let's go back to the checker again. What happens when you walk up to that checkout counter and you just got a big smile on your face and say, "Hi, how are you this morning?" And when you get ready to leave, say, "You did a good job. I appreciate that." Smile. Pastor's going to love this. Why don't you just all look at each other and smile this morning? Remember that? When you smile at someone, the barriers come down. And we don't know what that person's been going through. We don't know what their day has been like. But if you smile at them, those barriers begin to immediately come down. It puts people at ease. Can you imagine Jesus not being friendly? Look at that picture. Can you imagine him not being friendly? I just can't imagine. I think that he was a very friendly person. Okay? Ignoring people, being too busy with our own agenda, can really be a problem. And so, I'm telling you, we need to smile more. What does it say in the Bible? It said in Romans 16:16, it says, to greet one another with a holy kiss, all right, which was a custom back in that day. All I'm asking you to do is smile. That should be easy, okay? I remember we went on several trips to Italy because my daughter and her husband were there, and they really do greet each other with a holy kiss, okay? And that was hard for me. Yeah, I mean, when you kiss somebody on both cheeks, you're up close and personal, okay? All I'm asking you to do is smile. We need to have a little more humor in our lives as well. We need to take the next step after we smile and actually laugh. When's the last time you just had a really good belly laugh, you know? What does Proverbs say? Proverbs says, a merry heart does good like a medicine. Yeah. And we need to do that. If there's anybody happy in this world, it should be us Christians. I always like to catch Pastor just before he comes up front sometime in the back and tell him a really funny story just before he gets it, like he needs it. You know. My own grandfather was a great humorist, and I love some of his stories. And so I come from a long line of that. I come from a long line of humor. And I'd like to read some of his stuff just to give you a flavor of what my grandfather was like. He said one time, we grew a pumpkin on the farm so big, he said, that when they split it open, they found a cow grazing inside. He said at the age 5, he said, I took my thumb out of my mouth and started putting my foot in. He said one of the Pullens had a headache half the time because he said there wasn't enough brains up there to have a headache all the time. And then one of my all-time favorites, and I told Pastor this one last week, he said he caught a fish so big one time that he said one person couldn't tell a story, he had to have a helper. That was my grandfather. I come from a long line of that, so now you know what my problem is. I am convinced that the lack of joy and humor and encouragement leads to depression and despair. We need to do that. God's Word says we need to do it. We need to be happy people. Well, encouragement. We need to do more of that. We need to do more encouragement. You say, well, I encourage people, Gary. I talk to people and I tell them thanks. I want to go down a list right here in our church. I want you to think about this. Right now, at this moment, in our church family, how does this place stay clean? Who is watching our babies right now? How about our worship team up front here? Who mows the grass? Who plows the snow? Who takes care of the kitchen? How about the people who are teaching our Sunday school classes? Who are they? Who's in charge of Sunday school? Who serves on the board? How about our media people in the back? Who's heading up the new church? And who's helping with it? There's a lot more. That's a short list. Here's the question. When was the last time you went to one of these people, sought them out, and say, I really appreciate what you're doing? I think we need to do more of that. It needs to start here. But then we need to take it out and go out into the world with it and tell people we appreciate them. There's tons of people that do stuff for us every day. When was the last time that you ate out and you said to the waitress, you did a great job? You know? It's nice to leave money on the table, but I tell you what's worth more than money to that waitress or waiter is when you tell them, you did a great job. A lot of times, I wouldn't want to be, I don't know who's the waitresses and who the waiters are in this congregation. There's probably some. But I couldn't do that job. That would not be my pathway, as we talked about in Sunday school this morning. That isn't a job that I would want. But I really admire those who can do a great job being a waitress. Have you ever seen a really good one? I tell you what, there's some out there that can multitask. They can flat get it done. I knew one waitress, I believe she could run a whole restaurant by herself, and wait on everybody and get the food out. And the ones I really have fun with and enjoy is when they take an order for 6 people and they put the same plate down right in front of the person that's supposed to have that food every time, Have you ever had a waiter or a waitress come up and not have a pad in their hand and you make your order and they haven't even got anything to write down? You ever seen that person? And your food comes and you got it exactly right. I asked her, I said, you aren't writing this down. She says, no, I got it up here. She says, I know where I'm going. You ever said thank you? You're really good at what you do. You need to do that. And that's just one area. I mean, we could go on and on about the number of people that we need to thank and appreciate in our lives. So we need to love by actuating the positive. I want to ask you this. Isn't it odd that we don't have a problem finding fault with others? Isn't it odd for me to have to come up here and preach this lesson this morning and talk to you about appreciating and loving people to try to remind you of that? But when it comes to the negative side, I don't have to preach that one, do I? That seems to be a natural. That seems to be something that we're really good at. We have to work sometimes in this arena. Sometimes we just have to make it a special project in our lives to work at this and make it work. Maybe it's time to form a new habit. The habit of thanksgiving. The habit of being appreciative of people. The habit of telling people that we care for them, we love them. Maybe that's a habit that we need to work on. It doesn't need to be major, as I said before. A quick thank you, a huge difference in their lives it'll make. Because encouragement changes everything. Anne Marie's in charge of the card ministry here at church. Have you all received a card on your birthday? Yeah. I remember when, I believe, Carol, you were helping her for a while, and I opened up the mailbox, and there was a card for me with Church of the Nazarene. And I thought, well, they didn't need to waste a card on me. And in Carol's handwriting, it says, Gary, we appreciate what you do in church and all the stuff that you do. She didn't write it like that, but it was really nice. And signed it, Carol. And I almost had tears in my eyes. I walked to the house. I thought, what a cool thing, And so we need to do that. And maybe that's your gift. Maybe that's something that really works for you, is just sending cards to someone and saying, I really appreciate what you do. That would be nice. It doesn't have to be major. As Christians, we have the power to represent Jesus by loving others and lifting them up with an encouraging word. God loves everybody. And He wants to encourage them as He would, wants us to encourage the people as He would encourage them. And when I look at that picture of Jesus, I just think that He would encourage everybody. I think all of us want to be encouraged. Do you want to be encouraged? I always get a kick out of telling Anna Marie, I said, I want to buy one of those big signs that's at McDonald's. You remember the one that said 12 billion burgers served? You remember that one? I always tell the kids, I used to tell my kids, I go back so far, I remember when that said 1 burger sold. But Anne Marie cooks for me every day, one of the finest chefs that you'll ever find anywhere. And I always thank her every time. I try not to ever miss to thank her for that meal. And then I say, I'm going to go out by the road and change the sign. But I can't remember how many meals she's made me so far. And I need to sit down and figure that out, 3 meals a day for how many years? That's a lot of meals. When was the last time you thanked your spouse, for just something as simple as that? It's stuff we need to do. God loves everybody, and He wants us all to be encouraged. And He wants us to encourage people as He would encourage people. It starts here at church. But then we go out into the world and we look and we find people to encourage. And that's what I want you to do. And Paul, if you could throw that last scripture up there, I want us to look at this. This is what it says in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 and 18. It says, rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. I didn't make that up. That's Bible. That's Jesus. That's His people talking to us. And I want you to continue to do that. Rejoice always. Give thanks in all circumstances. And they're not all good, but God can make them good. We have the power. Christians, we have the power to change people's lives with just a few encouraging words. Sometimes it doesn't take much. Some time ago, I met one of our parishioners here, and I just felt like they needed a hug. And I walked up to them and I said, I'm glad you're here, appreciate what you do, and I gave them a hug. And they looked at me and they said, you do not know how bad I needed that hug. That's in church. How many people out there is there that just need a hug? And that hug sometimes is just an encouraging word. Just thanking them for being the cashier. Just thanking them for bringing your meal to you at the restaurant. It's what we need to do. It's what Jesus would do. Okay? Well, again, my messages mostly are of encouragement. And I hope this encouraged you. I hope this is something that you'll think about and say, I need to do more of this. And not only, I'll tell you what happens. If you start doing this, you think the other people get encouraged? You ought to see what it does to you. You get encouraged. You get enthused. And you're happy about the things that are happening around you. So let's stand together and have a final prayer, and we'll be dismissed.